Okay. So the food product and supply chain that will be discussed in this presentation is the leg of lamb destined for the British export market. So lamb is the meat from a young sheep, and to qualify as lamb, the young sheep must be slaughtered before it has any permanent incisors is cut through its jaw. And this occurs in sheep at about 1 year of age. As a result, most lambs are slaughtered between the ages of 6 and 10 months of age. Now the key characteristics of lamb is that the whole carcass must be between 9 and 12.5 kilos, and the fat tissue depth must not exceed more than 6 mils. The leg of lamb is cut from the rear hindquarters of the carcass of a sheep, and it can be boned or deboned. Sheep are seasonal breeders. This means they cannot lamb all year round. So in New Zealand, lambing occurs from early to late spring. Thus, lambs are ready for slaughter between the months of December and April. So the supply chain for a leg of lamb from producer through to end consumer in Britain has 7 key processes, as you can see on the screen here. The first step is the breeder finisher, and this process is raising and caring for the lamb from birth through to being ready for slaughter. Now the second step is the transporting or trucking company, and this is the process of transporting the live lambs from the breeders to the slaughterhouses. The third step is the processor and value adder, and this is a process of slaughtering the lambs and processing them into cuts of meat that are suitable for human consumption. Now the fourth step is the shipping and warehouse distribution, and this process is transporting the leg of lamb from New Zealand processors through to British ports. The fifth step is the international retailer, and this is a process of importing the leg of lamb from the British ports and selling them on the British market. Now the sixth step is the purchaser, and this is the process of purchasing the leg of lamb from the international retailer and then selling it on to the local domestic market to make available for consumers. Now the seventh step is the consumer, and this is the very end of the supply chain where the consumer will purchase the leg of lamb for their consumption. Now regulations are important to ensure safe practices are carried out across the supply chain. Regulations have been put in place to protect the welfare and safety of the end consumer. The supply chain for a leg of lamb is associated with many risks, such as unsafe food handling practices or inhumane animal handling practices. And the supply chain is also very large and complex, with many steps where risks can be increased. So to reduce these risks, regulations have been put in place to govern every stage of the supply chain to ensure that the leg of lamb reaches the end consumer in a safe manner. Now each regulation has a penalty for those who breach these standards, so this ensures compliance across the supply chain. Now the regulations are very clear and strict across the supply chain, and so they've had the influence of structuring the supply chain. For example, regulations stipulate that lambs destined for the export market must be slaughtered at a licensed premise. Thus, the steps to and from the processor have been put in place in the supply chain to meet this regulation. So the two most significant regulatory influences in the supply chain is the Animal Welfare Act and the Animal Products Act. Now the Animal Welfare Act is concerned with the fair and humane treatment of animals. It determines what treatment is acceptable and what treatment is unacceptable in the handling of animals. The 5 freedoms of animals must be met: freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from injury and disease, freedom from fear, and then the freedom and the ability to express natural behaviour. As a result, this influences the supply chain from the breeder through to the processor. The operations that occur have directly been put in place to meet this act. For example, the layout of the transport trucks for lambs have been constructed in such a way to ensure that the lambs can be transported in comfort and prevent injury. Another example is the layout of the processor. The handling facilities have been constructed to minimise fear and distress in the lambs to an absolute minimum before slaughter. The other significant regulatory influence is the Animal Products Act. The Animal Products Act is concerned with the safe movement and processing of animal products such as lamb meat. It determines how the animal should be slaughtered, transported to export markets, and stored in cold storages throughout transport. This act is responsible for the structuring of the supply chain from the processor through to when the lamb arrives on the export market. For example, this act stipulates the temperatures and construction of cool storage for transporting a leg of lamb. Another example is that this act stipulates how the processor should configure their production line to keep the lamb safe for consumption. opportunity that results from the Animal Welfare Act is that it is one of the most comprehensive acts of animal welfare in the world. So as a result, this builds trust in the New Zealand supply chain for the legs of lamb in overseas markets. An opportunity that results from the Animal Products Act is that it follows the most strict regulations concerning the handling and transportation of lamb meat. This as a result develops trust in food safety and security of the lamb meat coming from New Zealand. However, there are some issues that result from these acts. One issue with the Animal Welfare Act is that it is only concerned with the protection of animal welfare, not with animal rights. However, not all animal interest groups interpret animal welfare and animal rights in the same manner, so this can cause confusion and contention when interpreting the law. An issue that occurs with the Animal Products Act is that large parts of the Act rely on a paper trail with the transportation of lambs, so this information can be easily lost and damaged. And this can put the processing company at risk of huge costs when auditing occurs. So in conclusion, lamb meat is from a young sheep, usually under 1 year of age. The cut of the lamb is from the rear hind quarter of the lamb, the leg of lamb. And then many regulations have been put in place across the supply chain to reduce the risks that occur along the supply chain and to protect the end consumer from harm. The regulations have been responsible for shaping the way the supply chain has been structured. They bring advantages such as building trust and confidence in overseas market for New Zealand lamb. It does bring disadvantages such as difficulty interpreting some laws and increases the costs across the supply chain. However, overall, the regulations control the supply chain so that every step occurs in a safe and risk-reducing manner. And this results in safe legs of lamb for British consumers to enjoy. Thank you.